Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I are bringing you part of our top 50.
Yeah.
This is the next segment. You've probably seen at least two others by now. Or if you're in the future, you've maybe seen them all completely out of order.
Seem to be watching them backwards.
Not sure I understand that. But anyway, we're doing our top 50 of all time, and this is our 40 to 31.
Yeah.
You've probably already seen me and Jeremy do our 50 to 41.
I did mine with Emily.
Yeah, so
we're together here.
We're bouncing around and with different partners and going and doing each set of 10, finishing off with the top 10 of all time.
Yeah,
all four
of us.
Well, let's get right to our 40 to 31, Ryan.
Starting with 40, right? Oh, you want me to go first?
After you, sir.
My number 40 is Nidavellir. This is just a fantastic game. I mean, I could go on and on about the game, but I do want to say that what I really love about it is the accessibility and the ease of the teach. I mean, I taught you this game in less than 10 minutes?
Very quickly.
It's very easy to teach, and the set collection is very satisfying. I mean, you're basically bidding for these different rows of dwarves that are hanging out in taverns and bringing them into your tableau. But when you're completing a row, and a row of different dwarves lets you gain these basically heroes that can come in and do a bunch of different things. And that leads into, of course, one of my favorite things in games, combos.
Yeah.
You can grab these people, combo with other people, grab some more heroes, and every one of the dwarves scores differently. So there's always just a lot of thought that has to go into it, but not too much. I think anybody could probably play that game.
Oh, yeah, anyone can. And the bidding aspect is obviously a big part of the game. But the more I think about it, because I don't like a lot of bidding games generally, but that game feels more like it's a drafting game that uses bidding as a mechanic,
right?
It's because when people think about bidding, they think about like, oh, I've got this money, and what if I spend too much? Now I don't have this money. But the money is always just coming back to you.
Yeah, you're not really losing. You're not really spending anything.
Right,
exactly. You're just assigning values to your bids.
And that's what makes, I think, the bidding aspect way more interesting to me. So my number 40 is a game, probably one of the earliest games I'd played in board gaming. First, certainly on the Euro front, and it is Stone Age. When I think of Stone Age, when someone says, what's the quintessential old school worker placement game? It is Stone Age that I think of.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I know there were other worker placement games before it.
Oh, that was one of the big ones.
But it was definitely one of the big ones, and it has it's a pretty straightforward. It takes place in the Stone Age worker placement game that uses a little math when you're rolling these dice, and there's a little chance in what you're getting, which I actually enjoy, but it can be a little bit of a downer for some people when they go to the gold and don't get any.
Right, don't get anything.
And it's one of the first games I played where it's like, oh, and you have to feed your people, which is also kind of a drag. But it was the first time I'd experienced any of those things for worker placement, and I really, really enjoyed it. So Stone Age is my number 40.
It's a really satisfying game.
It is.
I can't really add anything onto that.
It is, and we found as we've
also
gone...
very accessible.
Oh, yeah, super accessible. And as we've gone down through this list, there's games that I haven't played in a while. This is one of them that makes me, when I talk about it, I'm like,
no, I want to play.
I want to
get the
Stone
anniversary
Age again.
edition.
Exactly.
All right, 39 for me is Gugong. This is from Game Brewer, and I have the deluxe edition, which is one of the greatest deluxe editions I've seen in all of board gaming.
It really is.
That amazing case, all the game trays, whatever. But all of that aside, presentation aside, Gugong is just a really great game. I've never seen anything like it before. When it's kind of a worker placement feel, but you're placing cards from your hand. And every worker spot on the board has cards. And you're taking a card from your hand, laying it down, and taking the card back that was there before. But you always have to be playing higher cards. And so if you're not planning ahead, if you're not going, doing it correctly, you won't be able to maximize your actions. And sometimes you have to skip an action just to get a higher card that you can use next round. And all of the actions are really cool. It's very thematic. It's very satisfying. Everything kind of feels like you're playing all these little mini games.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you're moving that horse around, you're building the Great Wall, you're sailing down a river. But it all comes together in a really satisfying way. And the expansion just makes everything about the game better.
Yeah, the expansion definitely helps the game, but I would agree in terms of compartmentalizing the different things you do, that game does it hardcore. I can never get away from doing that center part first and foremost.
Well, yeah, because you got to. If you don't get to up the center, you can't win. You just can't win.
I just check things off in that game. Okay, I'm there, boom, next, and I go to do that next section and try to check as many off as I possibly can. My number 39 is a far simpler game, also very accessible, kind of like Stone Age, but this is a more recent roll and write, and it is Trek 12. This is a Bruno Catala game, which really excited me, and then the look and the feel of it also excited me. The artwork is really cool. but it's deceptively simple. It is a roll and write that allows you to basically puzzle things out. This is not a combo-centric roll and write. I do love those. I love me some combo-centric roll and writes. But this one is really just trying to build a puzzle. You're connecting these nodes, if you will, with each roll of the die. And you kind of get stuck in corners where you're like, oh, I have an 8. I don't need an 8. And you're using the dice in different ways and marking those off. Like if you added the dice together 4 or 5 times, you're not adding them together anymore. So it kind of limits how you can use the dice as you play. And the theme is that you're climbing these mountains. The coolest thing, though, and I haven't really explored this too much, is there's kind of a campaign mode that you can go through and get achievements that unlock new rules and new components. You open these envelopes. So you can kind of play this over a course of three sessions and build the game into more of a game, which is kind of cool.
I want to do that at some point.
For sure.
All right, 38 for me. This is a game, David, that I'm pretty sure is on your list. And this is one of my favorite party games. This is Don't Mess with Cthulhu.
Nope, hate it.
Yeah, okay. We've played this game so many times together, and I've played it with so many different groups. So many different game nights have just ended with a game of Don't Mess with Cthulhu that turns into maybe 5 games of Don't Mess with Cthulhu. And this is what I think is one of the best social deduction games. In that, number one, there's no real player elimination, which I really like. And number two, that whole concept of like dealing out these cards in front of you, and everyone knows what they have, but no one else knows what anyone else has. And so you have so many great opportunities to like just lie and trick people. And when you're one of the cultists, and for example, you know you have Cthulhu in front of you, which is what the cultists need to win. And if you get that investigator to pick your thing by like, you know, building that trust over the whole game, and then that reveal is so satisfying. And, you know, even when you get tricked like that, you're on the receiving end, you're still like, oh, that was great.
Exactly.
You did so good. Like, you had me. And I don't think a lot of games build that kind of camaraderie at the table as well as Don't Mess with Cthulhu does.
Yeah, the other great thing about it is one of the rare occasions where a social deduction game plays really well at 4 players only.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe even best at 4 players, because it has a mix of how many different cultists can be at the table, and you never know. Really good game, and yes, it might be on my list. But not right now. Right now, at number 38 is Isle of Cats. Isle of Cats is a game that sort of, I can tell you, if I'd had a top 50, Bunny Kingdom would have been on it. Isle of Cats came on and bumped it.
Oh.
Now, you might be thinking, well, those are nothing alike. Well, they are a little bit alike in that you're drafting these cards and then using those cards to do things. Now, in this one, you're using them to put polyomino cats on a boat. In Bunny Kingdom, you're putting bunnies, well, in a kingdom. But this one, they both share that thing where the cards that you're taking are usually cards that allow you to do things right now, or cards that might let you score some things at the end. And you're kind of balancing those two. But the why this wins, in my opinion, is the puzzle that you're building in front of you. There's one of the most fun things that we do in gaming, especially me and my wife Alicia, she likes puzzling things together. And when you can feel like, oh, I'm fitting these things together perfectly to suit my game, it's really fun. And the cats are adorable. It's just an adorable game.
You know what's really funny is if you go back now and go watch my video with Emily where we did ours, I said almost the exact same things about Isle of Cats. Yeah, almost word for word even.
Yeah, it's a really good game, and that is why it is my number 38.
All right, on to number 37. Number 37 for me is On Mars from Lacerda. Obviously, I'm
Slightly
a huge,
heavier game.
Very heavy game. I'm obviously I'm a huge fan of heavy games and Lacerda. In general, I mean, there's a world where all of his games could have ended up on my top 50. Every single one of his games, they're like my go-tos. I could just grab any Lacerda game at any time. But I love On Mars for a lot of reasons. One of them being the theme, of course. I love that idea. I love space games. I love science fiction games. But what On Mars does really well is it balances your time spent on Mars building versus your time spent in your space station, kind of going back up there to get your goods. So you have to kind of cycle between the two, and there's a rocket ship that travels back and forth, and if you miss it, you're stuck on Mars until it comes back to pick you up. And so if you don't stock up with enough resources on your space station, when you go down to Mars, you got to make sure that you have enough to last you for the long haul. But that might mean being stuck in the space station and having to wait for it to come back and pick you up. So it's a huge strategy game. Of course, there's a lot of other elements of strategy and like how to build buildings, when to build buildings, how to gain these resources, how to, increase the livability of Mars. But there's variable scoring. There's a ton of variable tiles that come out. And so it's a really different game every time you play. But that balancing act is what I really love about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played it, but it sounds like the timing involved with
for
that
sure.
is a lot of tension
Yeah.
for you as a player. And that's something that tension, you love it.
I do love it. I do love it.
Me, not so much.
Even when it punishes you, like in combat, I get punished a lot, but I still like that tension.
Oh, wow.
And again, I think On Mars might be a little higher on my list if it was a little more accessible. It is a bit difficult of a game to learn. You really want to make sure that you're playing On Mars with somebody that's experienced in it, and don't try to just learn the game as you're playing, because it is a bit difficult.
I mean, that can go with any Lacerda, I think.
Yeah, but this one especially, I think.
Well, speaking of games that are maybe a little more difficult to teach, my number 37 is a roll and write that is maybe not super accessible, and it's Hadrian's Wall.
Oh, that's a great roll and write.
It is a great roll and write, but when you show this to maybe non-gamers, they might be a little intimidated. First of all, it has 2 sheets, and secondly, there's just so much on both of those sheets. The best way to describe it really is a medium plus weight Euro that happens to be a roll and write, I think. But unlike Trek 12, this one, the combos are so delicious. And
so multiplicitous?
you're going all over the place with the combos. And I think, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, the most brilliant thing about this design is it gives you these pieces, and you're using the pieces, these little meeples of different colors, to fire off all the different things. Number one, this helps with tracking. So in some roll and writes, you fire off a combo and you might go to different areas, which might take you to another area, and then you're like, wait a minute, where did I start all of this? This one takes that out of the equation because you're taking these little bits back and forth, not to mention the act of taking those bits back and forth is just super intoxicating.
Oh, yeah.
I've likened it to a slot machine in Vegas where you pull it, and instead of
All
like
these
seeing a
meeples come
readout,
out.
you see coins coming out instead of just like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Yeah.
So Hadrian's Wall, it is a bit of a teach, and I will rescind something. It's not terribly unaccessible once you've learned it.
No, it's just when you first look at the sheets. If you've never played a roll and write before, especially, you're like, oh my goodness, there's just boxes to check everywhere.
There is, but once you've learned it, and it is a bit of a teach and a bit of a learn, but once you've got that out of the way, it's pretty straightforward to play. But that is Hadrian's Wall, my number 37.
All right, number 36 for me is a little game called Cryptid. This is not a social deduction game, but a pure deduction game. A logic deduction game, and I love it. If you're not familiar, I mean, we've talked about this game on this channel for years.
Yes,
we've been
we
talking
have.
about this game, and it still remains a favorite. You have this really cool hex-based map with all these terrain features, and you're all looking for the same cryptid. And the fact that everyone is given a little bit different piece of the clue, and you're trying to figure out and deduce other people's clues based on where they're searching. So if David's searching in the desert a lot, maybe I think his clue says, well, maybe it has to be in the desert or one space away from the desert. And you're trying to do that with every player, trying to deduce what you can. And as soon as you figure out somebody's clue and you look at them and you're like, I've got your clue. But then they do something completely out of left field and you're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Or they answer, you're asking and answering questions in that game, and once you think you have it, and then someone answers a question, and you're like, well, that doesn't line up with what I thought about you. And then you've got people at the table going, are you sure?
Right,
You know what
because
you're
I
talking about.
feel like it has to be. And you're like, no. It's...
That is the one thing I think some people have a problem with Cryptid, and I love it, by the way. Spoiler alert, probably on my list somewhere. But some people think, when you make a mistake, it does kind of derail the game a little bit.
And that's,
just like most deduction games.
That's why it's actually probably not higher on my list. I think that's the one thing that it's still a great game and I'd always recommend it. But yeah, one player at the table who's not really paying attention or forgets their clue or reverses their clue halfway through, it really can ruin the entire game.
But it's a quick play game, so you can just reset.
It's not a lot. If you find that out, just reset it right away. Just be like, okay, sorry, we messed up.
You're playing more games. Just have fun with it.
Right.
So my number 36 is a pretty big game.
Okay.
This is a game that we had a chance to play pretty early on. We happened to get a copy of it, I think from Essen at the time, maybe. It's Azul.
Oh, yeah.
You may have heard about it. And this is OG Azul, the original Azul. This game, and it has a bit of a soft spot in my heart because of that, but I also think it's still just a really good version of Azul. I think Sintra was okay. Summer Pavilion I liked as well. Queen's Garden I liked quite a bit. But the original Azul is a game that I think almost every household could have in their collection. I know there's a lot of people probably a little tired of it. It's kind of like Splendor. Everyone was playing Splendor for a while, but then well, I'm above.
I'm a little
Splendor.
splendored out.
Yeah, splendored out. Same thing with Azul, but Azul is just it'll never leave my collection.
No, I can play that game anytime.
Loved it from the first time I played it. Super accessible, and I literally can play it with anyone. So that is Azul, my number 36.
I mean, I've always talked about how much I love Azul, so I'm not going to talk about it now, but maybe in another video I will.
Maybe.
So my number 35, I don't know how I ended up with this is like my deduction games section, but my number 35 is Mind Management.
Oh, wow.
And this is an interesting style of deduction game because it's also a hidden movement game. But I don't really like to call it a hidden movement game because that brings in, like Letters from Whitechapel or Fear of Dracula. It's not like that.
But it is hidden movement.
But it is hidden movement, but you're not really like trying to track their movement based on like, okay, well, I think they went this way. It's more about the symbols that they're hitting on these boards. And the board is filled with these different icons, and every space has a number of icons in it. And the recruiter, the person behind the screen, is trying to hit up as many of one type of icon as they can. And they have 3 cards behind their shield. And so you as the player are not necessarily trying to deduce where they're going, but rather what they've been targeting along the way. Because if you can figure out what they're targeting, that's how you're going to figure out maybe where they ultimately have to go and then catch them. And it leads to this very interesting back and forth, unlike any hidden movement game I've ever played.
Yeah.
Where you're really leaning into that deduction. Well, this spot has 2 icons and he got 2 things here, so maybe he has both these icons, right? Or, maybe not. And the fact that the recruiter, the hidden mover, can never double back on themselves. You can't do that Letters from Whitechapel or Fear of Dracula circle where they just endlessly circle to kill time and get confuse everyone. I think it makes the game a lot faster to play.
Well, for sure it
does.
And
you're going to be playing, either way, it's about an hour game.
Yeah, it's a very short game, and that's probably, to sum it up, one of the best things about it is because you can play it, and then you can play again, and then you can play again, and everyone, if they want to, can have a chance to be the person hiding.
And speaking of that, what I love about the game too is the shift system they talk about, where if one side wins, the other side gets a little bit of a boost for the next game. So if you play through multiple games, you have these little card packs. And for those who don't know, this is based on a comic series. Each one of those card packs has a little mini comic that kind of just talks about the benefit you're getting within the story. And then you're a little bit better. So if you have a recruiter that really knows the game well, you can actually give the investigators or whatever some of those packs to open to just give them a little bit of boost to balance out the playing field.
Yeah, it's a really, really good game. My number 35 is a 2-player game. This would be on my top 2-player games list. In fact, I think when we did ours, it was on there. It's an old one.
Okay.
It involves camels.
Okay. Is it Jaipur?
It's Jaipur. If you haven't played Jaipur, this is a great 2-player game, very straightforward, where you have a handful of cards that represent all these different sort of goods that you're trying to collect from the marketplace and some camels. Mm-hmm. And you're interacting with this main display of cards from the table from your opponent, trying to collect, say, X number of gold cards and then trading those in for corresponding gold tokens which have points on them. And the tokens sort of scale down in points as the game goes on. And you're going to do this until 3 of those stacks are gone, and that's it. And you play 3 rounds. And the camels have a cool interaction in there where you can grab up all the camels or use camels to help you sort of trade to get more goods. It's a very tense 2-player game in that you're like, okay, I'm trying to get the last gold token because it's worth more points. But I know you have a couple gold in your hand, and you need X number before you can even trade them in. So you're seeing if you can push a little bit longer, one more round to get that gold. Hopefully it comes out, but then you might not. But Jaipur, that is a great 2-player game and my number 35.
I only recently played Jaipur for the first time.
Really?
Yeah, a couple months ago we went away to a cabin con and that we were killing time and somebody said, want to just play Jaipur with me?
It is a great time killer.
I'll tell you what, as soon as I played it, I was like, oh, now I get why everyone loves this game so much. Because it's so quick. It's 15 minutes. But that 15 minutes is full of so many tough decisions because you're right. You're trying to anticipate what the other player is going to do. You're trying to push your luck and collect as many of those gems to turn in as you can. And it's a great game.
Yeah, and even though it's a unique game in a box, it has the feel of an old card game that you'd play with a deck of cards. Because when you're playing it, 2 experienced players, they're just going, okay, all right, and then dumping cards, exchanging cards, and it goes really quickly.
All right, so number 34. This is where we're getting to the part of my list that got really hard for me. Everything from like 34 to 11, like
It starts at 34, huh?
Yeah, these are like some
Okay.
of my favorite games of all time, obviously. But my number 34 is Lorenzo El Magnifico. This is a fantastic worker placement game. It's actually dice placement, so I do love dice placement games. You'll see probably several dice placement games on my list. But what makes Lorenzo stand out to me, and Emily talked about this a little bit too, was just that the dice that are rolled are communal for everybody. So we all have the same orange die. We all have the same yellow die or whatever. Our values are the same. So nobody just has that luck of the die where they rolled much better and so they can be better. And you're competing for all of these different types of cards by having to like send people your dice to these towers to like recruit cards, and you're building production engines. You're like building fields for growing crops and stuff, and you're recruiting artists. I mean, there's so much happening in this game. And it's just very, very satisfying. It's one of those games where you can like literally build an engine.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you trigger it, and you're like, oh, you're just getting all of this stuff.
When you fire off some of the cards in those rows that you have in front of you, it is a very satisfying feeling.
Yeah, and it's just it's a great classic Euro game.
Yeah, a little bit hard to wrap your head around the theme. It's a Euro.
I love the theme though.
Yeah, but it is the Euro game, Jeremy says.
It is, and it's based on an ancient family or old family in the Renaissance that was very rich, and they would send out their servants to do tasks for them. And
Well, speaking of which, the expansion for that
must-have.
is a must-have. Once you've played with it, you don't want to play it. It has one of the most unique ways of collecting your initial resources I've ever seen in a game.
Yeah, you're bidding for your family, and your family they all have variable powers, so you're bidding on which power you want. But the more people that bid for it, the less starting resources you get.
Right.
So some of the you might want to take one that's not a good power that no one's bid on just to get a ton of resources at the start of the game. It is very unique.
That was a very unique start. My number 34 is a game that came out a couple years ago. It was at the top of my list that year. I still love it. It has an expansion now that makes it even better, and it's The Lost Ruins of Arnak.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this,
classic,
even if it's just the base game, but particularly with the expansion, it's definitely my 34. I could see this even climbing a little higher over the years, depending on how much I continue to play it. Lost Ruins of Arnak is one of those games that came out that has that mix of deck building and worker placement around the same time as Dune Imperium.
Right.
There's some newer ones coming out now, like Endless Winter, that mixes those two mechanics as well. But I really enjoyed the exploration feel of this game, the discovery, which ironically or not ironically, has a lot to do with the theme of the game. You feel kind of like Indiana Jones-ish.
Yeah,
you're going out there and exploring. Sure. But there's a big stack of cards that are all different. And I just love a game that you're like flipping new cards and like, oh, wait, what does that do? Now, after you've played it a while, you get to have some favorites.
Oh, because I know you have some favorites.
Yeah, I do have some favorites. I think the Revolver is one of them. But there's a lot of cards in there that really lend themselves well to particular strategies in the game. So when you see those pop and you're thinking about that strategy, you're like, okay, I think I know what I want to do on my next turn.
And then somebody grabs the card out from under you,
yeah,
which happens inevitably.
But it is a really cool game, really gorgeous game. Love the components, love the look and the feel, and now I want to play it again.
All right, so my number 33 is the Manhattan Project Energy Empire. This is a very unique worker placement game. This is what we call like the Luke Laurie style. I don't know if he invented this style, but he definitely perfected it in that you're placing your workers, but you're all kind of placing in different patterns, and you're pulling back your workers at different times. So there's no like refresh phase where everybody's workers are coming back. Once you run out of things to do, you have to basically pass and retrieve all of your workers, which means all of the spaces that you were blocking are now becoming available again for the next player. And the theme of this game is pretty cool. I mean, you're creating power plants and trying to generate energy without polluting your world board, your little area. So there's a lot of like strategy there, but that timing of that worker placement is so interesting. I've never played anything else that gave it quite that same feel.
Except for some of his more recent games.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of kept this system going a little bit. But I think that this is the best example of like me staring at a worker placement spot going, David, please pull back. I want to take that spot. Please refresh so I can go there. And you're just kind of hoping that happens. It's just very tense and very interesting.
Yeah, so if you happen to have played Dwellings of Eldervale more recently but never played Energy Empire, go give it a try, because you're going to get a lot of the same sort of feels from that one as well. My number 33 is also a Euro. It's the year it came out, I think it was the medium weight Euro of that year, and that is Tekhenu, from Board and Dice.
Okay.
This game is got all of the different things that you want to be doing in a medium weight Euro all over the board. It's got this glorious central aspect of the game with the obelisk that's rotating, casting shade or shadow on some of the dice that you're drafting. Dice drafting is one of our favorite things here. There's some dice you can't even take. And then once you take those dice, there's this cool thing because depending on the dice you take, you're balancing them out on your player board. And that has some impact on player order. There's all sorts of interconnected things. And we talked about some games earlier that are very compartmentalized, where you do a thing, you do a thing, you do a thing. You do that here too, but all those compartments are interconnected.
Right.
Like this compartment does this. So like you have to really organize your thoughts as it relates to how all of those things help one another. Because you can't go to this one area unless you've gone over here and gotten some, X resource.
Right, or moved your population up high enough or built enough buildings, yeah.
Exactly, and it's got some really fun, juicy, sort of like ongoing power cards and end-of-game scoring cards that you can exploit and you brutalize. If the other players at the table aren't paying attention and you're able to grab this one and this one and this one, you can have a really, really exciting engine in front of you. Yeah. But yeah, Tekkenu.
I didn't realize you love that one
so much. I really like it.
All right, number 32 for me is Underwater Cities. This is a sushi game, like the same guy that did Pulsar and Praga, games that I love. This one kind of edged out a couple of those because I think Underwater Cities just has some fantastic moments where you're trying to play these cards from your hand and all your cards are color-coded. And they're good cards. Like these cards give you resources, they give you upgrades, they give you actions you could take over time, but the colors match these worker placement spots. And if you can play the same color card that matches the same color of worker placement spots, you get to do both things. And you can come up with some really cool combos that way, or have some really big moments where you can start building out your player board or upgrading some of the resources you get, like stacking on your factories or help producing factories or whatever they're called. Like there's just so many cool things you can do in the game, but that color matching system feels so good. Even when you have the perfect setup in your hand and you have the colored card, but then all of those colored actions get taken.
Yeah.
And you just have that frustrating moment a little bit, but at the same time, that's what makes the game so cool, is because you're doing that to other players as well. You think maybe they need a certain color and you go to take that spot and everybody goes, oh, come on, no.
Yeah, the frustration that you feel in that game is the good kind of frustration if you like Euro games, because I've said this before too, that game is so emblematic of that. Don't take my space. Don't take my space, because that one is tight. Like those worker placement spots are, you want the one you want when you want it, and if someone else takes it, it's very like, okay, now what am I going to do? And I'm one of those guys that doesn't want to get away from using the right color card. So that first time where you have to use the wrong color card, you're like, I feel kind of like a failure.
I know, right?
I guess I'll just do this.
And this is another game too, where when you get to the income phase, you start to just rack in so much stuff, and that always feels good. Like just to rack in like tons of resources.
Yeah, that is fun. We're kind of into the medium weight Euro phase of our list.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it seems like it.
My number 32 is a new one. It is from Alexander Pfister, and it is my favorite Pfister. Spoiler alert, there's no Pfisters higher on my list.
Oh, wow.
And that is Boon Lake. This is a new one from Pfister, and for me, from the very moment I played this, I knew, and I'm a fan of Great Western Trail. I'm a fan of Pfister's games in general. Some more than others. This one hit a perfect sweet spot for me in terms of the things that it was doing and how much it made sense and what, the flow of the game. He's got, of course, that classic thing where you're going down the river and people are going down the river at different paces, and it triggers sort of the progression of the game. But there's a lot of different things you're doing in this, and the most fun of it is all the cards. This is one of those games where you're going to have a handful of cards potentially, and you're going to use some of these cards for what they are and get them played into your tableau. But other cards, there's cards that let you dump cards for points or for resources or things like that. So a little bit of a multi-use card feel there, because you can't use all of your cards, and it could lead to little AP when you're doing that. And then the other aspect, there's this whole lever board, and it's basically the ability to use some one-time abilities throughout the game. And it's really satisfying to acquire those levers, but then literally you're flipping this little component up and down, which I know sounds silly, but it's really fun to go, I'll use this. And you flip the lever up, covers it up, and you get to use one of those powers. Not to mention massive portion of points to be scored with the lever board.
You know, Boon Lake's actually growing on me, and I'll tell you, I don't know
Yeah,
if you
your
really
initial
touched on
reaction
this.
wasn't.
It was okay, but
was
we also
okay.
played it at 2 players, and
Yeah.
I think I like this game better with more players. But the fact that you're doing stuff on other players' turns that keeps you engaged. The more I play it, the more I'm really appreciating how nice it feels to always be engaged. Especially when I do play some other Euros where I'm sitting there like, okay, what? Come back to me like I wish
sure.
I wish I was doing something on your turn. But Boon Lake, you're always doing something.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing for maybe the newer gamers in your life that they'll really appreciate is that they're not sitting there waiting for their next turn.
All right, 31, right?
We are down to 31.
My 31 is Pandemic Legacy, and I'm not gonna specify seasons 1, 2, or 3.
Just generally.
I've played all 3, and it is quite the journey. I will say that. I went into it liking Pandemic. I like Pandemic quite a bit in the puzzle you're trying to solve in Pandemic of like fighting off all those diseases and using your players' powers in the most effective way. Man, these Pandemic Legacy games add so many layers onto that.
Oh, yeah.
With such a unique narrative. And going from Pandemic Season 1, which was like, okay, Pandemic with a twist, into Pandemic Season 2, which was, okay, very different. You're literally exploring this world. You're adding stickers to the board. You're finding new locations. And all along the way, your board is changing so that when you get to the end of the game, you've played through a story quite unlike anybody else's. I actually shadowboxed all of my Pandemic Legacies just to show like how different my world looks at the end than versus another player. And Season 3 was wild. It was like a flashback and you're like government agents and doing all this like secret agent stuff. And it's just such a cool feeling game. And the fact that they can keep this basic Pandemic mechanic and yet add all these twists and turns to it so that it feels like such a different game. And then in addition, adding such a satisfying narrative that gives each player really cool character moments as well as just an overarching story that it feels very satisfying.
Yeah, we played. I haven't played a lot of them, but Alicia and I played through half of Pandemic Season 2.
That's it? That's all you've done?
Yeah, well, here's what happened. We were successful. We were like, oh, this is good.
Yeah, it starts
We're
you
having
off
fun.
pretty easy.
Well, all the way through May.
Yeah.
And then we lost the first time. And our interest in playing the next round after we lost went way down.
Oh man, we lose. But what I like about it is when you lose, they give you so much stuff to help you do better the next time.
Yeah.
And they, you really only can lose twice. So if you lose, you still move the game forward.
I mean, it's
like
been
that
a
you're
while.
not stuck there.
I'm hoping we can get back to it.
I hope you did too.
I did get Season 1 to play as well, so
And
hopefully
Season
we'll get
3 is, I think, the most interesting for me because you're literally like government agents and you have these passports. And you literally have, it's silly, but you have these stickers and you can build your own passport photo and like put disguises on your characters. So you have like 3 different passports and all your characters look different because they're wearing these disguises and they allow you access to different countries and different parts of the board. It's very cool.
That's cool. Well, I am down to my 31. My 31 is a very unique game for my list. It's one that I think I started playing a couple years ago. And with Alicia, which always gives the game bonus points for me when I'm considering lists like this. It is Arkham Horror, the card game.
I figured this would be on your list, David.
This game, when this came out, I remember looking at the rules. I remember, I think it was Brady Sadler was hardcore
I think
into
he
it.
still is.
Yeah, he loves these kind of games. I mean, a lot of his designs even feel like this. But this game had such a rule set that I'm like, I don't know that I'd ever want to tackle a game like this. But then, for one reason or another, I got it. I tried it out. The idea was that I wanted to play it with Alicia, just the 2 of us. But I tried it out on a couple friends first. So I played the first sort of scenario, first session with a friend of mine, and I really liked it. And I really thought she would like it. And we played it the following weekend again, she and I. Both of us really liked it, and then we were off to the races. I own not all the newest stuff now that they've kind of re-implemented how they're launching it.
Right.
But everything up until that point, I have. And we've only played through like 2 of the whole campaigns.
There's a lot
we
of
did
campaigns.
the first, we did the Dunwich one, but we have so much more to do. And it is one we will definitely get back to. Such a fun game, building these characters. And we didn't get too much into the deck building.
Oh, that's the fun part for me.
I know. I went to a site and said, okay, well, this is the kind of character I want. and it kind of has a bunch of pre-made decks, and we just use
Yeah,
those.
those resources are great though too.
Those are great resources. But yeah, the narrative and the exploration of each session where you're like, oh, whoa, this is really changing up the rules. Now, one thing that does introduce that I didn't think I'd like is every time we play, we have to look up some rule.
Sure, there's a lot of rules.
Like there's always some fringe situation happening and we're like, I don't know. And as frustrating as that can be in a lot of games, for some reason it has become part of this experience. And one that both Alicia and I are kind of like, we're on our phones looking it up on BGG.
Right.
Alicia would generally hate that sort of thing where we're having to look stuff up while we're playing a game to get it finished. But we're both into it. Like there's been times where we finished and then she'll text me and say, oh yeah, I looked into that a little further and it's this. Like the fact that we're spending time away from the game looking into it is a good sign.
I think that's great. I think that's also just a sign of, since the game is so complex, there are definitely going to be some situations that you can't just have in the rules.
It is.
And any game of that amount of complexity is going to come with those issues. So as long as you can embrace like, okay, well, this is part of why the game is so good is because there's so many different interactions.
Yeah, the system allows for so much
Yeah.
space to play with. You've got to take some of those fringe cases along with it. But that is our 40 to 31 here. We are counting down. We're going to have a lot more all the way down to our top 10. So keep watching. If you liked our list today, let us know.
Yeah, I want to know, people at home might be doing their own 50s.
Yeah, let us know what you think and whether there's some games that you have that would be in your sort of 40 to 31 range.
Yeah.
But until next time, as always, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.